All right, welcome everybody to another week of the Commanders Film Room. We're here at week 7. Gentlemen, 3 of the last 4 weeks, the Commanders have had a 21-point win over their opponents. I can get used to this over here in DC. It feels pretty good. It's definitely pretty interesting, pretty fun. Guys, thank you for joining our show. Feel free to follow us on YouTube. You can find us on Big Doug and Carmi. You can find all of us on X as well. I'm here with Mark Bullock and Doug McCrae. Gentlemen, we were going to talk about the Carolina Panthers, a 40-7 win, a big drubbing on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. But before we get there, we have some pretty pressing or breaking news. Another first-round draft pick under the Ron Rivera era was most recently released. And Mark, I'm kind of curious about this. Like, how do you feel about Jamin Davis being released? How would you describe Jamin Davis's tenure here in DC?
Yeah, well, I mean, the tenure overall was not good. I'm not too surprised. The bigger surprise for me was that he made the roster, to be honest, because I said it this whole offseason. We might have even talked about it on the show. The switch from linebacker to defensive end is a significant one, and he, as a linebacker, he'd never really shown that he had much pass rush ability. Like, yes, he's athletic, and everyone saw, oh, he's a good athlete. He's like Michael Parsons. We can rush him all the time. And it's like, there's more to rushing than just being a good athlete. You need to have different moves. Unless you are an elite athlete with an amazing get off and bend to beat guys around the edge, you need to have a variety of pass rush moves. And he never showed that he had any. He actually did better at defensive end than I thought he would in the few snaps that he had. But I just don't see a reason why you would want him on the field over anyone else. And like, if you're wanting a linebacker that stands up and rushes from the edge, you'd want Luvu taking those reps, not Jamin Davis. And if you want a more natural defensive end, you want Dorrance Armstrong or Dante Fowler's shown up really well the past few weeks, or Clinton Farrell, any of the other guys you would want over him. So I was surprised he made the final roster. I thought they would want that spot for someone else. But, they kept him going, and he didn't really show up much on film. So, I'm not too surprised that they've released him. The more surprises come that they've released him, not added a defensive end when they've been dealing with a bunch of defensive end injuries, like Dorrance Armstrong and Sean Baptiste. And Clinton Farrell is back now, but he had missed some time. So they hadn't replaced him necessarily, but hopefully that means Armstrong's going to be back healthy, and they can go from there.
So, Doug, it's kind of hard to point a finger, kind of pinpoint why the Jamin Davis experiment didn't work here in DC. I'm just kind of curious of your thoughts with Jamin coming over. Do you think he was he maybe overdrafted? Was he not necessarily developed that well with the previous regime? What was the root cause, in your opinion, for why Jamin Davis didn't stick here in DC?
All of the above, I think. I mean, I think it was probably overdrafted. The previous regime had a penchant for drafting lumps of clay that they thought that they could mold. I mean, that's kind of what they told everybody, was that he has the traits and the tools to be an elite linebacker, and we think we can get him there. And they just didn't get anybody anywhere. And we try not to spend too much time on this podcast going backwards and slamming people that aren't here anymore, but that's just the fact of the culmination of another bad plan on their part. He has the traits. I'll be curious to see what happens when he goes somewhere else. But to Mark's point, I understand why they tried to move him to end, but realistically, the guys that play end in the league have spent the last 10 years learning to bend. That sounds funny, but like the average person doesn't know how to get down 3 inches off the ground and run the loop. And these guys spend years and years and years doing it. To expect Jamin Davis to be able to do it in 6 months or however long he's learned the position, I do think it means good things for Armstrong. I wonder if this means Jean-Baptiste is a 4-game IR guy and not somebody they think will be long-term. But just, and also I think it goes to this organization being kind of classy. Just release him, let him go out there, try to find some work and see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you brought up a great point, right? Being an elite pass rusher is such a specialized skill set. You have to learn that then. You have to work on it for years and years. It was too much of an ask for him to kind of do that in one summer. Last question before we dive into film, Mark. We're looking at Nikki Javala had a great tweet talking about the draft picks from 2019 to 2022. Montez Sweat traded. Dwayne Haskins cut. Chase Young traded. Jamin Davis cut. Jahan Dotson traded as well. So we kind of have a poor miss at first round picks over the past couple of years. My question to you is, with that talent void, what do you think? How do you suggest the team is? Why are we successful right now? Is it the coaching? Is it Adam Peters' forfeit with the draft picks? Is it having a franchise quarterback? How do we get to this point? I'm kind of curious. Like, we seem to miss a lot, but we seem to be staying afloat right now. Just kind of curious of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, it definitely was quite the void of talent. The thing I said on Twitter not long ago is the good thing about it is it's all led to Adam Peters coming to Washington and Dan Quinn and Jaden Daniels. So it has all worked out in the end, just not the way that Rivera and his regime would have wanted it to. But yeah, look, they turned over a lot of the roster. I think it was something like 33 of the 53 were completely new players to this team this year. And they're going to be turning over more of it. I would not be surprised if this time next year there's only 5 or 6 of the guys from Rivera's drafts that are still on the roster. Because, the new regimes do tend to want to bring in their own guys anyway. And we've seen the success of or the lack of success that was from the previous regime. So there was always going to be a lot of turnover, and Adam Peters accelerated that. And in moving on guys that they just weren't convinced by, like Jahan Dotson and like Jamin Davis and what have you. So I think there will be more turnover to come, and that's just what it is. They've replaced them with guys that they like, and they've built out a strong coaching staff that is deep at multiple positions with good coaches, and they believe in their scheme, and they're putting guys in positions to make plays. So it really comes down to all of it. There's never one singular reason for the success, but they've had a lot of turnover, and I still think there are a few key injuries here and there away from suddenly turning into a team that looks terrible again, because they don't have the depth because of this lack of talent from the last few years of drafting. But as long as key guys stay healthy, they can continue to be successful.
Absolutely. So Doug kind of alluded to it. We talked about we're not always going to look backwards. We're going to look forward, right? So we're going to basically look at our game film from this last week, kind of take a look moving forward about how the team looked. Mark, I'm going to throw it over to you. I guess my initial question is, a 40-7 win is definitely something to be proud of. What impressed you more, the offense or defense, after this last week?
Definitely the offense.
Okay.
But it impressed me not necessarily for the offensive performance, because generally the Panthers are pretty terrible on both sides of the ball. But it was more the way the system was set up and the way Kingsbury called the game, and the sequencing in his play calling was really good. And I'm going to run through some of that here. So this was the first play of the game. This was the Jaden Daniels 46-yard run that he got injured on. But I want to break it down very specifically, and you'll see why coming up. So the first play, we see a call where they're in 21 personnel. So this is Jeremy McNichols and Austin Eckler in the slot. So that's 2 running backs. So 21, first number is running backs. Second number 1 is tight ends, and I think that's Zach Ertz here. And then you've got 2 receivers on the outside. So what they're going to do is they're going to motion Eckler across the formation like he's going to motion over to this side, and then he'll suddenly loop back around and stop here as a second running back in the backfield. From that point, they're going to run this GT counter scheme. Now, I think we've broken down the GT counter scheme a few times on this show. A GT counter is a normal counter run, but instead of a guard and a tight end or a fullback pulling, you pull both the guard and the tackle from the same side of the line, hence GT, guard tackle. So what you're going to have is right guard Sam Cosmi's going to pull and he's going to kick out the edge this side, and then you're going to have Andrew Wiley pull around behind him and wrap around for the first linebacker. So that is the GT counter scheme, and Jaden Daniels can hand this off to Jeremy McNichols and run that himself. That is the GT counter. What they do add is a read option element. So you can see here we've got this defender circled. He is the read player, and Jaden Daniels is going to read him. If he crashes down inside in the run like he does, Daniels can pull it. If he doesn't, he can just hand it off. And then the final element we have is Austin Eckler here in the backfield is going to arc around this unblocked defender and act as a lead blocker for Jaden Daniels. So that is the play broken down. We'll run that through, and everyone's seen the play at this point. We all saw it obviously on the first play of the game. You can see he snaps the ball. This defender takes his first few steps down the line. So Jaden Daniels puts the ball into the gut of Jeremy McNichols, sees the defender continuing down the line, pulls it, and decides to go around him. You can see Eckler arcing around him. They get the block on with Eckler on, I think that's JC Horn, and Jaden Daniels is sprung free. I've seen a lot of people commenting, and I kind of believe it myself. I do think Jaden Daniels, if he had kept to this outside, probably outruns this safety, but I can also see why he cuts this back inside, because he beats the safety. He just gets caught just a little bit there. If he doesn't get caught there, I think it's a house call. But I think there was a chance he could have turned it into a house call if he just sprinted down the sideline. But I understand why he cut back inside, and unfortunately that led to him getting brought down awkwardly and hurting his ribs at the end of this one. And we'll see the end zone angle. Again, the motion is important to remember. We have that GT counter scheme. Daniels pulls it and runs himself, cuts back inside and gets brought down awkwardly from behind here, injures himself.
Yeah, and Quinn made sure to say that was a body twerking type. I think David Aldridge was the one that asked about maybe a Kevlar suit of some, a vest of some sort. And Quinn said, well, he's already got something very similar. This was a twisting, torquing type of thing, not an impact injury.
Yeah. So what I really liked about this game is how well Kingsbury sequenced his play calling and how he set up his different runs. So this was the very next play of the game, and you can see it's the exact same look to what we just saw. So it's the same personnel. We've got Austin Eckler and Jeremy McNichols in the backfield. Eckler's going to run that same motion across and loop back around. And it's going to look exactly the same. So naturally, the defense is going to think they're running the same play at us. But they aren't. What they are still running a read option play, but it's not the GT counter. It's just a zone scheme to this side, and then they're reading the defensive end on this side rather than this side. And as we run this through, you'll see Eckler does the exact same motion. It's the same look for the defense. And what you'll see here is, we'll come back to this guy being read down here in a minute. Watch this defensive end. This is the guy that just crashed down inside on the GT counter, and he got read, and Daniels ran past him and went 46 yards. So he sees that exact same motion, that exact same formation, personnel group. Everything looks exactly the same. He recognizes it. So what does he do at the snap? He's like, well, last time I crashed down, I got burned 46 yards. So instead, he backs away. And he backs away and invites Andrew Wiley to come and block him rather than going forward to try to engage in the block. He gets blocked back and backs away, and he's terrified of getting beat to the edge again. So that was that part of that. That's the impact of running the same look and changing the play, is this guy doesn't know what's coming now. Sorry, you want to make a point, George?
I just want to say one thing real quick. So I think one thing that really elevates offensive play callers, like a lot of them are brilliant, right? They can draw some really great plays up. I think feel for the game and pacing and kind of putting things in sequence is also, that elevates you to that next level. So I love the fact that Kingsbury is doing that. I also love the eye candy with the movement with Austin Eckler. And finally, my last point is we talked about how great of a blocker Austin Eckler has been throughout the season. So it's really cool to kind of see him kind of spring out the run for Jamin Davis earlier.
Is that the pony again?
Yeah.
Mark? Yeah.
Yeah. So when you have 21 personnel as 2 running backs and 1 tight end, you typically it's known as 21 pony when the 2 running backs are traditional running backs rather than a running back and a fullback, which in old school football you'd have the fullback and the running back count as your 2 backs. But yeah, so they run a different scheme here. They run a zone scheme here. So it's not the GT counter one, it's a completely different scheme. And you can see on this edge that defensive end drops back thinking he's getting red and doesn't want to get beat again. But instead, this time Jamin Davis is reading this defensive end. This one holds his position, so he hands it off, and Austin Eckler is able to pick up a nice 5 yards on the zone to the other zone run to the other side. And again, we see it here. You get this motion across. It looks exactly the same as the previous play. And again, this guy is terrified of getting beat, so he steps back. And what defensive lineman have you ever seen step back at the snap of the ball? So he's worried about getting beat to the edge. He's worried about Jamin Davis pulling it, but actually they've switched it up, and Jamin Davis is reading the guy on the other side of the line. And this is a theme you'll see as we progress through this. But yeah, Austin Eckler makes a nice cut, and they pick up 5 yards, and it's just a really nicely sequenced play. So the GT counter scheme that we talked about previously was a recurring theme throughout this game. They used it a lot, but they sequenced it really nicely. And so this is another one. A little bit later on in the game, you can see, I think this is Mariota at this point. But they run the GT counter read this time. Same kind of idea as before, but they're in a different personnel group. So this time they're in 2 tight ends, 2 receivers, 1 running back. So 12 personnel. And they're still reading this guy on this edge, but they change up what they do. So rather than having Eckler run this motion loop around and lining up here, they've got Noah Brown running a jet sweep fake to this side, and they've got their 2 tight ends on this side. So we'll run this one through, and you'll see we'll run that jet sweep. We'll run the GT counter. Defensive end crashes inside again. Mariota pulls the ball, and unfortunately, Terry McLaurin is kind of sleeping on the backside here. If he goes and blocks Horn, as well as Eckler blocked Horn on the previous one, I think Mariota has a real nice gain here, but because he's kind of sleeping, he doesn't really engage in the block, and Horn's able to get off and make it stop. And Mariota does well to fight for a few extra yards, but that could have been a 10 or 15 yard gain rather than a 3 or 4 yard gain, which is what they got. But the important part here is not the result of the run, it's the look that they did for that run. So we saw the look of the run. It was a GT counter to the left, and it was 12 personnel. They had Noah Brown running the jet sweep. This is the next drive. You're showing the exact same look. You got your 12 personnel, your 2 tight ends down here. You got Noah Brown's going to run that jet sweep fake, and this time they're going to run just a normal counter scheme to the right this time. So again, it's showing the same look, and it's running something different, and it causes issues for the defense. They think naturally when they see the same look, they're like, oh, I've seen this play before, I know exactly what I'm going to do, I know what's coming, and suddenly they're hit by a completely different run scheme. So again, Noah Brown's going to come across. You're going to get Nick Allegretti pulling and kicking out the edge, and Ben Sinnott's going to join in, and he's going to follow and wrap around for the linebacker. And they're going to run a little same side counter. So just to add in the twist of it, Brian Robinson, you don't typically see a run going to the same direction as the alignment of the running back, but that's what they're going to do here. So again, it's the same look, same motion, and suddenly this defensive end was crashing down inside, expecting the GT counter, and suddenly he's hit by Nick Allegretti, and Brian Robinson's able to pound it up the middle. We'll see it again here. Just a nicely sequenced play again. Cosme and Wiley get a really nice push off the right side. Yeah. Nick Allegretti gets the kick out. You've got Sinnott coming in and blocking the first linebacker. You get that nice crease from Brian Robinson, and he picks up 7 or 8 yards on that carry. So just another example of how nicely they sequence plays, and it just continued throughout. So this is another completely different look. You've got, again, 12 personnel, and the important part here, again, is to notice the look that they're giving to the defense. So you've got Zach Ertz here. It might be John Bates. It's one of the tight ends here, aligned as the Y tight end. You've got Sinnott on the outside. And before the snap, you're going to have the tight end motion across, the line up on the right side of the line. And then they're going to run a read option play where they're reading that defensive end on this side. I think it's Brian Robinson can carry it up the middle, or Jaden Daniels can pull it, and Sinnott can be the arc blocker that arcs around this unblocked guy and leads the way for Jaden Daniels. Marcus Mariota at this point. So it is John Bates. He motions across, gets himself set. Then they bring Sinnott in motion. They're leaving this guy unblocked. John Bates is he's looking to block inside, and then this guy is expecting to get blocked by Sinnott. He's actually left unblocked. He kind of blocks himself. He's crashing down. Mariota pulls the ball, and suddenly you've got a 2-on-2 with a quarterback running. Like if Noah Brown blocks this guy and Sinnott sees Noah Brown blocking him and he goes for the safety instead, you have got a quarterback without a free defender, potentially. Like if this is Jaden Daniels, you're thinking this is another potential house call, right? Unfortunately, Sinnott goes for the same guy that Noah Brown's blocking, and that leaves the safety inside free. Now, Marcus Mariota does a really nice job. I think this was a 2nd and 2 or something like that. And he cuts this inside and still gets the first down. But it's just it's a nicely drawn up scheme, but B, it's setting up another run. So we see it again here. Keeps the ball and picks up a nice run, picks up the first down. Again, later on in the game, I think this was later on in the same drive. This was like 4 plays later. It's the exact same look. You've got, again, John Bates here. He's going to motion across. You've got Sinnott on the outside. He's going to come across at the snap. And you're going to run a read option, but to the other side. So this time you're reading the other defensive end. And you can hand it off to Brian Robinson inside, or Mariota can pull it. So it's all about showing the same look, showing the same personnel group, the same formation, the same motions. And then suddenly we're running a completely different play. And the defense is caught off guard. And Brian Robinson goes and picks up a really nice gain on this one. We'll show it from the end zone angle. Unfortunately, John Bates got called for a hold, sorry. But it was a nice run. It was nicely blocked. And again, we get some decent movement from Cosme and Wiley as they move that defensive tackle back. Biotish seals off this side. John Bates battles well with this guy and ends up holding him. You can see here, there's the hold. And Brian Robinson tries to bounce it and then cuts upfield. It was a nice gain. Unfortunately, that hold wiped it out. But it's just another example of we're showing the same look, the same formation, the same motion, the same personnel group, and running a different play. And it was just a constant theme. So another one here of that. This time we've got, again, 12 personnel. This is a really nice variation of a zone scheme, by the way. We'll dive into that. Because you're seeing the amount of variety they have in their run game is kind of incredible. They have a lot installed, and we've seen a lot of different run schemes already, but we hadn't seen much zone. So this is a zone run. You've got 12 personnel. You've got Ben Sinnott lined up back here inside of, this is Zach Ertz. It could have been John Bates, and they showed this look with John Bates there as well. And a typical zone run, you do quite often see what's known as a split flow. This is a sift block or a slice block, where you'll see a tight end sift back across the line. The line are all going to block to the left on a zone scheme, and you'll see Bates sifts back across and cuts off this backside guy. And what that does is create a gap between this defender and this defender for Brian Robinson to cut back into. The twist that Washington adds here is that typically you see this tight end blocking on the front side, and instead he's going to effectively become a second sifter, but on the opposite side of the line of scrimmage. So it's almost going to be like he's going to run like a shallow cross, and then he'll get to this linebacker and block him, and that's going to create an even bigger lane, and we'll run it on, you'll see it. So they all block to the right all block to the left, and you see Ertz is going to come across for this guy, Sinnott's going to come across for this guy. As Brian Robinson gets to the front side, he feels like, okay, I can't really bounce this outside. I might have a chance to cut this back. And as he puts his foot in the ground, you can see here, Ertz has made his block, Sinnott's made his block. There is this lane emerging here that Robinson can cut back into, and that's what he does. And he picks up a nice 7 yards.
Hey, Mark, I don't know if you remember this. We actually diagrammed a play very similar to this a couple of weeks ago with Ben Sinnott coming across for a stiff block. I think it was John Bates that came through for Austin Eckler touchdown converting up the middle. So it's definitely a play that they like to use in the red zone. one thing I do want to add really quickly, it's got to be incredibly frustrating for the defenses to play against Washington's offense, especially during the zone read concepts, because you have to be extremely disciplined at all times, especially when Jamin Davis is the guy that behind the line of the scrimmage, right? Because they're doing so many different looks, and he's so fast, he's so dynamic, and throw the ball over the top. So it's got to be frustrating.
Well, and the run game keeps them. I mean, how many times have they actually gotten into 3rd and long this year? I mean, the whole year it just doesn't happen very often because the run game has been so effective.
And then finally, on top of that, you're exactly right, Doug. I feel like this whole zone read option they were doing, now we're doing zone runs, but before they did, the zone reads, I feel like it slows up the defense when trying to come up the field to blitz. They kind of have to hesitate because they have to, follow their rules as opposed to just blitzing. And I think that's helping out the offensive line.
Yeah, that's all 100% true. And the layer that they're adding on top of it now, that Kingsbury didn't necessarily do so well in Arizona. Like, they had a good run scheme in Arizona, and they ran a lot of good things, but they didn't sequence it and layer it the way that they're doing it here. And the way that I've been trying to get across here is again, it's the same looks that they're showing every time, and they're running different things out of them, and it makes it really, really hard for the defense, because when they see the same alignment, they're probably thinking this is another zone run to the left. This is the same look that we just saw. Sinnott lined up behind. This time it's Bates rather than Ertz, but it's still a tight end.
How much of that do you think is the Anthony Lynn effect, Mark?
I think that probably plays a lot into it, because this is the kind of stuff that Kyle Shanahan does a lot of, is layering his runs concepts, making it all look the same. Sean McVay also did a lot of that. And it comes from the Shanahan system. And obviously, Anthony Lynn coached with the 49ers under Shanahan the last few years. But before that, I think he was originally drafted by Mike Shanahan. I think I'm right in saying that. And he played under Mike Shanahan and coached under Mike Shanahan as well. So he is well versed in how the Shanahans set up a run scheme like this. So I would imagine, given that it wasn't something that Kingsbury did particularly well in Arizona, I would imagine that Anthony Lynn has had a pretty big role in doing this kind of stuff.
And we talked about this yesterday. I don't know if you heard this, Mark, but Austin Eckler, I think, was on with Grand Danny and said they install almost 30 new plays per opponent, which I thought maybe that's usual. I'm not quite sure, but it seems like a big number.
Yeah, that sounds like a big number. I wonder how new those new plays actually are, but because there's a core concept that you would call, and then you might adjust it to an opponent. I'd imagine that's probably more what's going on, is that they're making adjustments to core concepts that they call. Like, this is a counter scheme that they run every week, but they haven't necessarily done it out of this look before. And this formation, this personnel group, and what have you. So I imagine that's more along what he means, but it does sound impressive to install 30 new plays every week. And maybe that is what they're doing. They are coming up with lots of new screens and gadget stuff, which we'll get to. But yeah, so this again is it's the same look we saw a minute ago. 2 tight ends aligned tight. You've got Terry McLaurin also aligned tight. Quarterback under center, and instead of Sinnott SIF blocking, he's actually part of the counter scheme. So again, it's going to be Allegretti kicking out and Sinnott wrapping around for the linebacker. And you'll see we run it here, and Robinson gets a nice 5 or 6 yard gain again. And then off of that look comes, I know this is a play you liked, Doug. This was the screen. Yes. It's off of the exact same look. So you're starting to see them build layers on layers of plays out of the same looks. So again, we got the same look, it's just flip formation. So rather than Sinnott and I think this is Ertz this time, might be Bates. No, it is Bates. Rather than them being aligned on this side, they're aligned on the right side. But it's the same idea, and Sinnott's going to sift across and make it look like it's a zone run that way. But actually, Mariota's going to fake a handoff and pull it back and throw a little screen here, and you're going to have Bates out in front, and Andrew Wiley's going to join in, and you're going to get the screen to Zacchaeus, I think. And it potentially could have been a really big hit because they got a corner blitz into it as well. So then you get Bates coming out, and in theory, from this point, you're thinking Bates blocks the corner, You got Andrew Wiley coming out to block. I think this is a linebacker, maybe it was a safety. And you've got Zacchaeus catching it with nobody else in the area. You're thinking this is a pretty big play. Unfortunately, Bates just slips going for this corner, and Andrew Wiley kind of zeroes in on him and thinks, I can go get him as well, and ignores this guy. And unfortunately, that's the guy that goes and makes the tackle. And the play was actually wiped out anyway because Sam Cosme got down the field before the throw was made. But it was just an example of A, really nice scheme, but B, from that exact same look that we just talked about with the zone runs. Two tight ends, Sinnott aligned back, Bates slightly further out, you got a receiver further outside. Looks exactly the same as what they have been doing, and suddenly they switch it up with a screen. So it's layering things on top of each other. The other nice thing that I really liked is they kept with the GT counter scheme. We've talked about that a lot. That's a scheme that Kingsbury really likes. But to layer the GT counter scheme, they window dress it. And this was one of my favorite window dressings that they did, which was an unbalanced offensive line. So you can see this is right tackle Andrew Wiley lined up on the left side as a tight end. John Bates goes and lines up as a right tackle instead of a tight end. Now they're just going to run the same GT counter scheme with a read that we saw earlier, where you're leaving this guy unblocked, he's being read. You've got right guard Sam Cosme coming to kick out the edge. You've got Bates peeling around to wrap around for the linebacker. You got this side of the line collapsing the run inside, and it's the same scheme. It's just from an unbalanced line to disguise it, and it works really nicely. You'll see Wiley comes in and lands a nice hit here to help Coleman move this guy down the line. You'll see Cosme kick this guy out, and Sinnott will wrap around for this guy, and you create a really nice crease there for Brian Robinson to run that up there, cut that up, and I think he picks up 11 on this play. So a really nice scheme. And they went back to it on the goal line. So this was Brian Robinson's touchdown run on the second or the third drive. So Mariota's in at this point, but it's the exact same play. You got Wiley aligned on the left side as a tight end, technically, and then John Bates technically is the right tackle. But it's the same scheme. They're reading this guy on the end here. He holds his position. Again, worried about any potential quarterback run because he's been burned already a couple times by that. You get Wiley helping Coleman knock this guy inside. You get the kick out from Cosme and Sinnott. And then suddenly you get that lane emerging inside the heart of the defense, and Robinson cuts it up. And then he does a really nice job here at the end.
And George, we talked about this yesterday, George. They get him. You can see it right here. They hit him at about the 4.
Mm-hmm.
And he drags them to the goal line.
Absolutely. I have a question for you as well, Mark. So I think the offensive line has been performing pretty well. It seems to have some pretty good synergy right here. Do you have any concerns about the offensive line potentially next year? Because it was funny, going into this year, it was like, oh, the offensive line is the biggest concern. I'm worried about Jamin Davis, but they're pumping right now. And they're having a guard tackle pulling and Andrew Wiley being one of the major factors in here would definitely been shocking about 2 months ago. Are you pretty confident in the offensive line moving forward? Is it still, I mean, it's way early, but is it a need for next year in your opinion?
I do still think it's a need. I think they can still upgrade on the players involved. Now, I think they've done a really, really good job of playing to the strengths of the guys they have. And they've been using a lot of the run game. And obviously the quarterback run game really helps. Like, not having to block a defensive end on every play is pretty nice. Makes it a lot easier. And then having that defensive end worried the rest of the game of, am I getting blocked? And not only am I getting blocked or am I being read, but also who potentially could be blocking me. Because like on this play, this was from the previous week, and I'll explain why in a minute. But on this play, you've got the right tackle and the right guard pulling to the other side of the line. You've got two tight ends lining up at fullback, both running towards him but arcing around him. He's actually not being blocked at all, but there's potentially like 3 or 4 guys that could be blocking him. So the whole game, he's like thinking, am I going to get blocked by a tight end? Am I going to get blocked by a fullback? Sometimes it's even a running back. Is it a tackle? Is it a guard that's going to pull? Is it even, we've seen Tyler Biotish pull to the edge and block guys? Like, who is going to exactly block which player? And is that player even going to be blocked at all? Or are they just going to be left unblocked to be read? So that creates a lot of confusion in defenders, and that makes it a lot easier on the offensive line. So they designed the scheme really well to help the offensive line, and that's partly why we've seen success with them. But I do still think they can upgrade in certain spots. I think Biotish has played really well. Sam Cosmi has played really well. Coleman's been really good in the run game, which surprised me a little bit because that wasn't his thing in college. I think he's still got some work to go in pass protection against kind of better rushers, and they've helped him out a lot. But you'd like to get to a point in the future where you have a left tackle that doesn't require chips and stuff on every play. Like it's been such a luxury in Washington where we had Trent Williams for so long, where you could just let him lock down whatever rusher was on the edge. We didn't need to help him. We could help elsewhere, or we could get all 5 eligible receivers out into routes. What they haven't been able to do is get all 5 eligibles out into routes consistently because they've been having to chip and then go to the flat. So that is the next evolution, is you want offensive linemen that can handle those stuff without needing the help. So I still think they can upgrade in certain spots. Obviously, you got a question with Andrew Wiley's contract next year. It's a very cuttable contract, and it's quite an expensive one if they keep him. He's playing at a good level, but I kind of think that there might be a move for Coleman to the right side in the future, and then Andrew Wiley possibly could even be an upgrade over Allegretti at left guard. Now, Allegretti's played well, but I think Andrew Wiley's a better player. So you could potentially think about doing that, or just moving on from Wiley. And then you'd still need a left tackle. So I think they still have some questions there long term. But they are all playing well. And if you had this exact group back next year, you wouldn't be complaining about it, I don't think.
Real quick, Mark, before you do this, I was thinking about that screen that you showed just a minute ago. Do we underappreciate I was thinking about how close the receiver and the tackle run next to each other as that ball comes out. Do we underappreciate the nuance? I mean, I think people say, oh, it's just a screen pass, or oh, it's just an extended run play, but do we underappreciate just how nuanced those plays are?
Oh yeah, and like all of these are nuanced. Like when you've got multiple guys pulling and multiple guys running in different directions, like on this play that we will get to here, like you've got 2 guys pulling to the left, you've got 2 guys effectively pulling to the right. You've got a running back trying to get inside. You've got Jaden Daniels trying to pull it outside. So you've got 3 different guys going in 3 different directions each way. There's a lot of collisions that could happen, especially with big offensive linemen that aren't necessarily the most athletic, right? Yes. So there is a lot of nuance, and you have to be really precise in how you're moving to avoid running into each other. But I wanted to bring back this one. We talked about this one last week, where it's the diamond pistol formation. You call it a diamond because they got 3 guys, and it kind of looks like a bit of a diamond. And you've got so it's pistol, and you're running that same GT counter scheme with a read, and you got 2 tight ends pulling to the edge, so you have potentially 2 lead blockers if Jaden Daniels keeps it. We talked about this last week. First, it was Austin Eckler if Jaden Daniels hands this off, Austin Eckler probably has a touchdown over there. He keeps it. It's not necessarily the best read, and they don't get anything out of the play, but it's still a nice scheme. And yeah, like we see here, if Eckler has that ball, this linebacker's running, he has no idea who's got the ball or who's going where, because there's blockers going everywhere, and there is a huge lane here. So unfortunately, he doesn't hand it off, but that's that one. And then this was the exact same play a little bit later in the game, and again they misread it here. This is the one that Jay Gruden tweeted about and said he hands this off and they get a nice gain out of it. If Jaden Daniels keeps it with 2 lead blockers, this is a long run, and you can see that this would have been a long run, but he hands it off, and I think that was a bit of a better read, because this guy kind of held his position a little bit, but with 2 blockers out in front, I could have seen why you would have run it. They still pick up a positive gain. But my point in showing this is, again, going back to the idea of showing the same looks and running different things out of them and layering your concepts. So this week, they came back to the same look, the same diamond pistol formation, 2 tight ends in the backfield. They're running what looks like the GT counter scheme with the tight ends arcing, and it looks like it's reading this guy. And they run a play action off of it. So it's setting up play actions, and they didn't need much play action against the Panthers because, frankly, the Panthers were terrible and they could be run all over all game. But this is one of the few play actions they showed. Now, the GT counter scheme, I wrote about in the offseason is a favorite of Kingsbury, and it's one that's really hard to do play action off of, because if you're pulling both these linemen to the other side, it's really, really hard for the center to get back across and try to pick up this defensive end and stop him from just running into the backfield and blowing this up. But by having these two tight ends here and having having run last week this read option play last week, suddenly this guy's going to be alert to it because he's seen it in film study last week. He's going to be alert that this could be a read option play, so I'm not just going to charge up the field. And then I've got two tight ends running at me, and suddenly you've got two tight ends that can block, and that makes the play action viable. And so we'll see here. It looks like it's going to be the same run scheme. You'll see these defenders. He's going to instantly bite up thinking this is a read option. You get another linebacker biting up. You even get the safety kind of starting to bite up. And what that creates is this void in the middle of the field that Terry McLaurin can just kind of drift nicely into. Now, I think Mariota could probably fling that into him right there. He's probably a little bit cautious of this safety getting there. So he kind of hesitates. I still think he probably, if he had just made the throw immediately as he saw McLaurin probably makes a contested catch. But they just string it out. So McLaurin just keeps running. Mariota carries on. And now suddenly that window opens up a little bit better. And this is a really nice throw. We'll see it from the end zone angle. This is a really impressive throw on the run. But again, you see these guys all biting on that run from last week, knowing that it was a real threat, creating that void in the middle of the field. And Mario does a really nice job like this right here, throwing on the run, making this throw to a guy running away from him, fits that in with a defender peeling off and the safety chasing. That's a beautiful throw. And great play.
Whoever was out on the boundary was at the 40-yard line wide open too.
Yeah, Brown.
Yeah,
Brown, right?
Noah Brown. Yeah. That would have not necessarily been the first read in that kind of concept. Right. That's usually there to take off the safety and create a space in the middle. But you can alert to that sometimes.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just had a question for you as well. So one of my favorite parts of working with you, Mark, is you have that great eye. You basically showed some symmetry between the Ravens game and the Carolina Panthers game with a diamond formation. I'm curious, right? So Marcus Mariota, there's a high probability that he might play in the next game. Do you think that there's going to be a big variation in the offense, or can they continue to run the same concept with Mariota behind center?
No, I think they can run pretty much the same offense.
Okay.
You might change some of the things that Mariota likes to do, and if we have time, which I think we should do, I'll get to one or two of those plays where we're showing what Mariota likes to do as a passer. So you might change a little bit of the passing game to run more of the plays that he likes than Jaden Daniels necessarily. But in terms of the runs game stuff, like we've seen it, like they ran it really well this week, and Mariota was in. They were still able to run the read option stuff. He's still an athletic quarterback. He doesn't necessarily have the game breaking speed to rip off a 50-yard run, but he can still be a threat. He can still pick up 5, 6, 7, 8, 10-yard runs. So and that's enough to be a threat. So just to finish off on Kingsbury before I get into a little bit of Mariota. Kingsbury started to have a little bit of fun in this game, showing some different run schemes. This one is the direct snap to Brian Robinson.
I love this
Jaden Daniels lines up at quarterback, and before the snap, they both shift across, and Brian Robinson becomes the quarterback and takes a direct snap. And then they run what's called tackle trap or tackle long trap. So instead of the guard pulling and kicking out, you get Brandon Coleman pulling and kicking out. So again, it's just a different variation on a scheme that they run. It gives them a new look. Typically, if Allegretti was pulling, suddenly you'd have a threat of this guy potentially crashing through that gap, and Biadasz is covered up, so it'd be tough for him to get there. It'd be tough for Coleman to hinge inside and get that. So instead of having that, you just let Coleman pull instead. And you shuffle across, you run the direct snap, and before the Panthers are even ready for it, they snap the ball. Coleman gets his block, and then Robinson actually makes a really nice play here. He sticks his foot in the ground and cuts this back to the backside, sees that there's a hole, and turns it into a 8 or 9 yard run when it probably shouldn't have quite necessarily got that much, but because they didn't quite get this block on the edge. Coleman did okay with a guy trying to wrong shoulder him, but they didn't get the block on the edge to replace that guy and bounce it. But Robinson does a really nice job of being alert to that, cutting it back and hitting it backside, which a lot of backs wouldn't necessarily have seen. And I think this is the last run play that I'm going to show. So this is one more, just a nice little variation. I talked about Coleman's a really athletic guy. Nick Allegretti isn't quite as athletic. So on this type of run, normally you'd see these two combination block this guy, or you'd be looking for Coleman to reach him, see them off, and then Nick Allegretti to climb to the second level and block this linebacker. Now, that climb to that second level to block a linebacker isn't easy if you're not the most athletic. And this block isn't easy to seal and reach off if you're not stout enough, because this guy can just penetrate straight away. So instead of asking these two guys to do things that are not necessarily great at, they switch up the responsibilities. So they have Nick Allegretti block down and seal this guy off, and they let Coleman, the more athletic guy, wrap around him and go and get that linebacker. And then you get a really nice double team from Biotish and Cosme on this defensive tackle up to the linebacker, and it creates a nice run. So it's just a couple of the little detail things that you see. Again, you get Allegretti sealing off the guy with a better angle, allowing Coleman to pull and go get the linebacker. And suddenly you're all blocked up a lot better than you probably would have been if Coleman was trying to reach across this guy and Allegretti was trying to climb and get this guy. You get it nice and blocked off a lot easier. And now, I mean, look at this. That's a really nice blocked up play. And Robinson can kind of go anywhere with this. He can try to cut this back. He can hit this gap up here. You can bounce it to this one. You can potentially even try to bounce it to the edge. But he plays it to the front side and then sees that Wiley's got his guy turned around and Cosme's pushing the defensive tackle, and suddenly he's got this lane. As soon as that linebacker commits inside, he's got this lane, and Robinson hits it, and they get another 7 or 8 yards. So that was some of the run game stuff that I really liked from Kingsbury. It was the main points to take away were how well he layered things. They were showing a lot of similar looks and running different things out of them. And that sets up stuff for, like we saw with the play action with the diamond pistol GT counter read thing that they showed against the Ravens. They came back to it this week and ran a different play off of it, and you could see how effective that was. But Kingsbury also had some nice passing calls, and this was one of the ones. This was an RPO, and I've never quite seen an RPO run this way. I tweeted this one out earlier, and it's one that people think is kind of like a tight end Texas route where he breaks out to the flat and cuts back inside. I think it is designed to kind of look like a slant flat combination. And that's kind of what it does. That's the effect that it has. When I saw it live, I thought it was almost a choice route because of the release of Ertz here. When you see a tight end running a choice route, they usually loop their release to the numbers, and then they give a little stutter, and they can either break it outside or inside. But you don't typically have the time to run a choice route on RPO. So I think it was just, it kind of looked like that, and it was more of this kind of Texas angle route. So you'll see the effect of it. Ertz starts breaking out to the flat, and McLaurin starts coming inside on his kind of slant route. And this defender that is covering Ertz is worried about getting caught on this little pick play. And so he immediately is starting working out to the flat to avoid it. And what that does is create a nice little gap here for Ertz to suddenly break back into. And you can see the defenders playing the run. They're worried about the run. They're biting up heavy inside. That allows Mariota to pull the ball, keep it on the RPO, and hit this nice, easy window to Ertz as he breaks inside with the defender out leveraged. And suddenly Ertz makes this catch with a lot of room to run. And I know we've talked about No Yak Zach before. I know Nick, if he was here, would be talking about it. He picked up a few yards after the catch. How about that? Not amazing amount, but there's some there. So yeah, I just like that scheme. I wanted to highlight it. I thought it was a nice little variation that they showed out there. Another little variation, Ben Sinnott's touchdown. I thought we'd highlight Ben Sinnott. People have been clamoring for him to get the ball. He finally got it. But I really like the detail that they added into this. So they go 13 personnel. They're really heavy on the goal line. They're going to make it look like a zone read on this defensive end, and Sinnett's going to look like he's arcing around to be the lead blocker, and he's actually just working out to the flat. The extra detail that they have is Noah Brown is in because he's their best blocking wide receiver, so that helps sell the run fake. And he's going to run in here and look like he's trying to block on the edge for the potential threat of Mariota pulling it and keeping it himself. So that's just an added little detail that I really like that helps sell this run fake completely. And you'll see as we run it through, he runs this inside, makes it look like he's going to block, really sells the run, and that causes Horn, the only guy that could potentially stop Sinnett, to come inside with him thinking, okay, there's actually a run coming, I need to come inside. And then suddenly Sinnett's outside and he has no chance. That's when Brown suddenly peels back off. He knows I can actually get to the end zone here and be a threat. And then Horn's left in this position of there's actually two guys that I could throw to, have to cover, and I'm not going to be able to cover any one of them. Fortunately, Sinnett was the first option, and he's wide open, and Mariota finds him for the touchdown. And then
one question for you, Mark. So I don't know if it was a coincidence or just, I don't know if there's any rhyme or reason behind it, but it seemed like the tight ends were incorporated a lot this game with like Sinnett, Zach Ertz, and so on and so forth. Do you think it was a scheme? Do you think it was Cliff Kingsbury maybe potentially calling those plays, or do you think Mariota is less aggressive than Jane Daniels, in your opinion? Or both?
No, I think it was designed for them to use more 12 personnel. Last week against the Ravens, when they started, they were really heavy in 11 personnel and they really struggled. And they found their rhythm once they started switching up to the 21 and the 12 personnel stuff. And so they started out really heavy in 12 personnel. Like the first 3 plays of the game were all 21 personnel, and then I think 4 of the next 5 were all 12 personnel. And so they were quite clearly setting out their stall, even with Jaden Daniels in the game, to be like, we're showing different looks. We're not just going to line up with 3 wide receivers all game. We're going to show 2 tight ends. And I think that was mainly because the Panthers are terrible at run defense, and you bring in 2 tight ends, that gives you 2 nice blockers, and you can run a lot of your run game, you can run a lot of your play action game, and you can run a fair amount of your passing game out of 12 personnel. So I think it was a game plan thing for the Panthers, and I think it's something we'll see a lot more of going forward is more using 12 personnel, because I personally feel like that's their best personnel group. Also, nice little touchdown dance here from Benton. He gets Major Tuddy involved. They both get dancing there. So talked a little bit about Mariota. I thought he bounced back nicely. He had a rough first few plays. I think people were a little bit too harsh for him too early. Like the first throw that he missed, everyone was like, this guy's terrible. It was his first play, like being called off the bench, and he missed a deep over, like a deep throw to Diami Brown by about 2 foot. I think people were a little bit harsh at that point. But he settled in, especially in the 2-minute drill. This was a really nice throw. You've got Zach Ertz running a deep hook, and then you've got Diami Brown running what I think is a deep curl. And this is a familiar play. Like Diami Brown ran a similar play to this last year. We saw this last year with Sam Howell. I think it was against the Seahawks. We'll get to this at the top of the route. I think I paused it. Yeah. So at this point, Mariota is already making his decision to throw the ball. You get this defender that has seen Ertz breaking off, and he's peeling back thinking, I'm watching Mariota, I'm going to break back outside and get underneath this curl route. And I think we saw this same thing last year with Diami Brown, where he kind of breaks inside and it looks like it's a curl. It could also just be a deep basic cross. I tend to think it's more of a curl route, and Mariota kind of leads him more across the field. And so that's what you see. You see this safety, it's not this safety, sorry, this linebacker, I think it was actually a slot corner, reading Mariota and thinking, I can get out to this. And so Mariota throws it into a window behind him rather than leading that corner or leading that defender to Diami Brown. He leads Diami Brown across the middle of the field into the second window. And this is a really nice throw. You'll see it from the end zone angle. And Diami Brown, credit to him, he does a really nice job of reading that play, reading how Mariota's leading him. And you can just see it here. Mariota's delivering the ball, and you can see the defender working that way, and he throws it this side of him instead. And it's a really good throw. Hits Brown in stride, and they pick up a nice play.
And Mark, I remember us breaking that play down last year. If I recall correctly, the problem last year was that Diami didn't didn't flatten the route properly, and it looked like a year later that he did a better job of that this play.
Yeah, I mean, Jamin Brown has certainly shown improvements this year. I still think I don't think he's a receiver that he wants to be yet. But that was a nice one where those kind of plays are plays that are slightly off script. It's one of those where I think he's meant to be running a curl route there. But when he comes out of the break, you can see that there's a guy potentially in his throwing window, and you can see that Mariota's leading him more towards the middle of the field. So it's a really nice adjustment to break across and continue that route towards the middle of the field and make that catch in that second throwing window. Now this one here is probably my favorite throw I've seen from Mariota. It's definitely my favorite throw I've seen from him in Washington, but one of my favorite throws I've seen from him in his career because of the eye manipulation. And this is something Mariota does sneakily quite well. So you got a little bunch set here. You got Noah Brown on the outside here. He's going to run a deep in breaker. You've got, I think this is Zach Ertz. He's going to run a deep out breaker. And then you've got Zacchaeus that's going to motion it, do a little exit motion outside of Brown, and then he's just going to spot up underneath. And what you're going to see is this is trying to create a little high-low where you have a defender in this kind of area here, and you're trying to manipulate him. Either he's going to sink back deep, in which case you just hit this short ball underneath Zacchaeus and then run after the catch. Or ideally, he steps up to Zacchaeus and you can throw this in behind to Noah Brown. Now, what Marcus Mariota does an excellent job of is you can see, I think I diagrammed it, I did. He gets himself completely aligned, and you'll see this better from the end zone angle, but you can see it here. His shoulders, feet, helmet stripe, eyes, all aligned straight at Zacchaeus. So for the defense, that looks like he is throwing that ball to Zacchaeus. And particularly this linebacker that I talked about that is the high-low defender, they want to get him up and biting up on that to open up this window for Noah Brown. So that's what Mariota does. He gets himself aligned, he makes that defender bite up on it, and just a millisecond later, Mariota begins his throwing motion. Now he's still aligned to Zacchaeus, that gets that linebacker to bite up. You can see at this point, he's basically releasing his throw. Noah Brown hasn't even made his break. He could still run into Zach Ertz at the top of this route. And he's not sure that this linebacker is definitely guaranteed to go down to this, but he's confident that by aligning to Zacchaeus, he's manipulated that linebacker enough to open this window for Noah Brown over the middle. And that confidence pays off because he hits Noah Brown over the middle on 3rd and long for a 15-yard gain. And you'll see it from this angle. You'll see how well he gets aligned. So you can see instantly he's looking helmet stripe, shoulders, feet, all aligned out here. And you can see this linebacker reading him. He's looking for Mariota for clues of where to go, where he's going with the ball. And you can see Mariota is quite clearly looking out to the flat here. So the defender starts to bite up and Mariota begins his throwing motion, all still looking. You can see the helmet stripe is still looking at Zacchaeus here, but he throws this ball into this window here. Throws it behind that linebacker, hits Noah Brown. It's a tremendous throw. It's a really, really high level throw. And it's stuff that you see from like
Stafford.
Alex Smith used to. Yeah, Stafford does it a lot. Alex Smith used to do it quite a lot for Washington when he was in his coming off his really good year with the Chiefs and the 6-3 year before he got hurt. He used to do that quite a lot, and that's a really high level play. That's hard to do. It's manipulating coverage with your eyes. So just tremendous, and that's the kind of stuff that I think you will see a little bit more of from Mariota is attacking the middle of the field. And it's not that Jaden Daniels can't or doesn't attack the middle of the field, but I think it's something that Mariota prefers. I think Mariota doesn't have the arm talent that Jaden Daniels has to attack outside the numbers and throw the deep stuff. He's always been a lot more comfortable attacking kind of between the numbers or specifically between the hashes in the middle of the field where you can see things a lot better and drive the ball a lot better. So to be able to attack the middle of the field so confidently, you need to be able to manipulate those defenders. And that's something that Mariota clearly is able to do. I've got a few more if you want to go through the last few ones from Mariota. I don't.
Sure. I was just going to say a real quick comment real fast. You got to give Mariota credit, right? We all forget that he missed a great deal of the preseason with, I think, a pec issue. He was out for a little while with an injury, so he missed a great deal of time there. And then on top of that, as a backup quarterback, you don't get a lot of reps during the week, right? You're kind of observing, doing mental reps, watching Jay Daniel play. He stepped up in a good game. I give him credit for that.
And again, Biotis deserves a lot of credit. Backup quarterback in, they get no reps other than the 5 they probably ran on the sideline real quick before he got in there. And again, none of them over his head, none of them in the dirt. They still did a couple of under center stuff. So just really a tremendous amount of credit needs to go to Biotis event.
Yep, I give credit all around. Biotis definitely handled things nicely. Mariota came in and played really well once he got himself settled. This was another nice play. This was a kind of an off-script one. They're running this kind of deep out concept with a deep corner route, and that's kind of what they're looking to hit. But Mariota gets pressured and wants to come back to this backside dig. Now, J.C. Horn does a really nice job covering Terry McLaurin on it, but when you go off script, it's a lot harder to cover a guy. So they motion Luke McCaffrey in. He's going to run the deep corner route. You've got Noah Brown running the deep out, and the hope is that you put this corner out here into a real bind where he's trying to decide, do I cover Noah Brown or do I sink back deep and cover Luke McCaffrey? Now, he can cover Luke McCaffrey. He can go to that because this flat defender does a nice job gaining depth and getting underneath Noah Brown. So that makes this concept a lot harder for Mariota to hit, which is why you see him wanting to work to the backside to Terry McLaurin. But Horn is pretty tight in coverage and right there with him. So Mariota starts to feel pressure. He feels like, I've not really got anyone to go to. So he does a nice job starting to scramble, feeling pressure. We'll see it from the end zone angle. But as McClellan gets to the middle of the field and he can see the pressure arriving, he's like, okay, I'm not just going to keep running. I'm tightly covered. I'm going to peel back outside here and try to create an option for him. Mariota does a great job scrambling away from the pressure, and then he finds McLaurin with a nice throw over the middle, back across his body, which you don't usually recommend, but you can see it from this angle. He kind of checks this early. He quite early decides he doesn't like the stuff on this side, and he comes back across to McLaurin, but Horn is right there. It's pretty good coverage from Horn, and so he decides, no, that's not there. Maybe I can try to find something back on this side, maybe something developed that I haven't seen. Casually moves in the pocket with the pocket moving back to him. Now, these offensive linemen are blocking this play for a lot longer than it's designed to, so they're doing a good job. Eventually, protection's going to give out. It kind of gives out right at this point. And at this point, it looks like it should be a sack. And for a lot of quarterbacks, it would be. But Mariota shows really good awareness to be like, okay, I can see Allegretti still fighting this block. If I can just get to the right side of this, I still have a chance for Allegretti to recover that. And he does a great job getting through. Allegretti kind of ends up getting 2 for 1 here by kind of running into both of these guys, and Mariota's able to step up, and that's when he sees McLaurin peeling back and throws a nice ball back across. Great now, play. Again, you don't necessarily want to risk that throw back across the body, but it was relatively safe at that point, and it's a really good play. So I think that was it. Yeah, that was all I had.
Mark, it feels like the Lions, the Ravens, and Commanders, if you're starting to list some of the more interesting offenses in the league. And it's wild to say that, but I mean, I think that's kind of where we're at now.
Yeah, I would still say I think like the Rams and the 49ers would be pretty good if they weren't quite so banged up. Sure. So they've been a few teams have been dealing with injuries that have kind of left a void, and Washington have definitely stepped up and filled that void. And they haven't necessarily faced the best opposition in terms of defenses, but you can't hold that against them. They can only play against the teams they play against. So they've definitely done really well. They're definitely way ahead of where I thought they would be. And the scheme is really interesting. They're adding new layers to it. And I think the biggest thing for me is that you see the evolution from Kingsbury. The things that I talked about throughout, where you see him layering stuff, you see him sequencing things, where he's showing these same personnel groups, the same formations, the same motions, and running different things out of them. It's all really, really good stuff. And I haven't seen a run game this well sequenced in Washington since the Shanahans were here. So it was really, really, really good from Kingsbury. And, Anthony Lynn probably had a big part of that, so he deserves some credit as well. Obviously, offensive line coach Bobby Johnson deserves some credit. But I would also say there's a lot of coaches in the NFL that would not take the advice. They would have too much of an ego to be like, okay, this guy's coming in underneath me. I'm the offensive coordinator. He's the run game coordinator. He's the offensive line coach. I'm not going to listen to those guys. I'm going to run things my way.
Great point.
So credit to Kingsbury for putting ego aside and being like, these guys can help me and the team develop and be successful. And he's clearly learning because they're doing a lot of stuff that they didn't do in Arizona, and it's paying off. They're doing really well so far.
They got the Bears coming into town on Sunday. How does the Bears defense match up with this Commanders offense in your mind?
I mean, the system that Washington runs, if Jaden Daniels is healthy, it's going to be a challenge for every defense that they play against. Just schematically, it's really tough. As we pointed out through this, you have linemen pulling every which way. You have tight ends pulling every which way. Sometimes it's 2 running backs. Sometimes it's 2 tight ends, 3 tight ends. Sometimes it's an extra offensive lineman. Sometimes it's completely spread out. So the defensive line don't know who's going to block them on any given play. It could be literally any one of the 5 offensive linemen could block any of the 4 or 5 defensive linemen. It could be a tight end. It could be a fullback. They could even be left completely unblocked and being read by Jaden Daniels. So that puts a ton of stress on any defensive line, even one as good as the Bears with Montez Sweat there now. Even he's going to struggle with how this system runs so many different things at them. So I do feel confident that the scheme, if Jaden Daniels is healthy, will give the Bears a challenge. The Bears, there are ways to stop this running attack, and we saw that with the Browns and the Ravens. If you commit, rather than playing 2 safeties back deep, if you put 1 guy extra in the box and you really commit to stopping the run and making sure Jaden Daniels doesn't carry the ball, you can slow down the run scheme significantly. But we saw last week with the Ravens, that just sets up play action. You can just play action over that, and then suddenly you're hitting, rather than a bunch of 5, 6, 7 yard runs that are working your way down the field, suddenly you're hitting 20, 25 yard passes over the top of that. And suddenly you're down the field in 3 plays rather than 7. And so that then causes the defense to have to pick. And it's the thing we saw with Washington against the Ravens. It's like, do you play heavy on the run and get burned over the top, or do you sit back deep to stop getting burned and let the running game destroy you over the course of the game? So it's the same kind of thing that Washington are doing now, and it will test just about any defense they come up against.
Mark, as always, thank you for the great breakdown. We definitely learned a lot this week. We learned that Washington is multiple on offense, disguises their offense with very similar looking plays. Great lesson sequence calling by Cliff Kingsbury. So that's been great. Then Mariota has been looking pretty comfortable and works in the middle of the field. So awesome for that great breakdown. To bring it on home, thank you guys to all the 727 people that watch us live. Definitely thank you for that. Watch the replay on YouTube. Follow Mark's work on Twitter and on his Substack. You can catch us all week long. We have our opposition breakdown on Wednesday. We have our media show on Friday. Thank you guys. Catch us next week for our Commanders Film Room. Peace out.